Welcome to the Term Rental Playmaker podcast, where we break down what it really takes to win in short-term rentals in today's market. From insider tips and emerging trends to real conversations with top playmakers in the space, this show gives you the tools, strategies, and mindset to build and scale a successful short-term rental business. Now, here's your host, Joe Roney.
This episode of The Co-Host Coach is brought to you by Savvy STR Agents. If you're looking to buy a short-term rental, then contact the STR Savvy Agent team at savvy.realty.
Hey guys, welcome to the first ever episode of the Short-Term Rental Playmaker podcast. I am Joe Roney and your host, and I am super excited to bring on one of the best, if not the best, and my current revenue manager for all of my properties, Mr. Emile Sakhel. How are you?
Hey, Joe. It's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I just figured, as we went into this new year and, with kicking off this new podcast, revenue management, in my opinion, is something that has evolved so much over the last few years, and it's almost a must, which is why it seemed fitting to have you on today.
No, absolutely. It's an evolving discussion in our niche space. Revenue management has been around for decades in every industry, from airlines to hotels to other businesses, and you name it. But ironically enough, the whole hot topic of revenue management really started to kind of tap into our space more frequently within the past 2 to 3 years. So super excited that it is becoming more and more of an awareness to individual investors, to entrepreneurs, to property managers, to co-host. And it's really foundational. So super excited for the growth of revenue management and all the ongoing debates along the way of how to price properties and how to really optimize revenue, because that is one of the most important components to our business.
Yeah, it is. And, for anyone getting into space, everyone's like, oh, you got to use a dynamic pricing tool. And that was me. 4 years ago when I bought my first short-term rental, I'm like, I'm going to get into Price Labs. I'm going to learn stuff about it. And I did. And I learned a lot about Price Labs. But, as I've learned more, especially over these last 6 months, I was doing a good job, but I wasn't even scratching the surface with how robust these revenue management systems can be. And it's great. But who has the time when you're managing a dozen properties plus, employees plus other businesses, whatever you have going on, to really dive in and spend the time that it takes in revenue management? And you have a whole team that this is what they do.
No, absolutely, Joe. You bring up a good point. There's a misconception that these pricing tools like Price Labs is phenomenal. In fact, we use Price Labs day in and day out. It truly is a vehicle. And we as individuals have to choose who we want to drive that vehicle, whether it's yourself, whether it's a teammate, whether it's a hire, it's a revenue manager. Pricing by Mira, my revenue management company, it's not a pricing firm. We're a decision quality firm. That's why our results compound. Most people manage prices, but we're managing timing, structure, confidence. That's the difference between reacting to the calendar and engineering the entire year.
Yeah, I agree. And, for everyone out there that does it on your own, you can do this on your own, right? And I was probably spending 6 to 8 hours a week, earlier this year before I made the change on checking my competition and going in and making adjustments daily. And, because it's not a set it, forget it tool, like we talked about. You can't just set Price Labs and say, oh, I'll come back in 3 months and check it out. It's something that you got to be very active with if you want to be a top performing property. If you're out there and you want to be average, set it, forget it. That's fine. The rest of us are going to make some money. But Emile here is helping me make a lot more money. And I'll be honest, my rates already for spring break are 30% higher than they were last year when I was doing my own revenue management. And yes, we had a 15% increase with the Airbnb fees, but that's still an additional 15%. So I'm 30+% higher than I was 1 year ago already.
Yeah, Joe, I'm happy you've acknowledged that. I think it's a great starting point for 2026. Super excited to see your spring break bookings. Everybody today in today's climate should begin to be ready for spring break rates. Christmas is upon us. Now we got the New Year's. Booking windows are in play, and it's super super important to think about this. Tools do not create top 1% results. Thinking does. Everyone has access to the same softwares, but very few people know when not to act. And that's why us at Pricing by Mira perform and global revenue managers are performing at a high level is it's the granularity. And what I love most about revenue management and what I pride myself on is the foundational and fundamental concept of psychology. It's not always about the objective data. Objective data is a big component, but really incorporating the art and the psychology and the consumer behavior and the consumer journey from the time that they search for their property, send an inquiry to their property and book, and leave that 5-star review. So, it's really a holistic experience, and we have to think about all the variations and the nuances that go into this industry when we're playing with the RevPAR metrics, when we're playing with the occupancy, the ADRs, the min stay rules, and all of the above.
Yep. And, the one thing that I also like to tell people when I talk to them, because as a realtor now, when I'm selling homes, I'm telling people that are closing, you need to contact you or a few other revenue managers. I give them some choices to say, because they are going to make you more money than you trying to do it yourself and learning it. Now, if you want to become a property manager and you want to become, a co-host, whatever it may be, and you want to dive in and learn it, by all means, go do it. But if you want to be if you want to be as much passive as possible and make more money, man, I'm seeing a huge impact on even just taking over a couple of properties for new short-term rental investors for you guys.
100%, Joe, and I appreciate the words and truly love seeing the positive impact that you're seeing personally and professionally from revenue management. It's important to understand that we revenue managers that do this full time, we're not chasing demand. A lot of these objective data tools are built upon data points and scrape data based off supply and demand metrics. But where we need to come into play, and it's the qualitative component of revenue management, is we're positioning for the demand. We're not chasing the demand. So revenue isn't always about being aggressive. It's about being intentional longer than everybody else around you. I really pride and preach on hedging your competition. It's super, super important to always be thinking 1 or 2 steps ahead of what others are doing. And most of what others are doing are setting it and forgetting it. So once you really start to deep dive and you get granular and you're spending a few hours a week at minimum, and truly identifying those gaps is really how you optimize your revenue.
And and I'm going to bring up an example, and I've told this example on this show before. We just took over a property. We were managing the sister property. It's a duplex, so it's 2 units, same. They're 5-bedroom, 5.5 bath, in-ground pool, the whole works. And property A with XYZ Property Management Company, who has an average design and an average property, did great. They did $103,000 on this property. We redesigned the property, had the right revenue management in place. We did $220,000. Identical properties side by side. And there's 2 key components that went into that. Key component number 1 is the design, and number 2 is a huge part is the revenue management. And I think that it's really important that you have both of those. If you're going to hire a revenue manager on a turd property, they're not going to make a huge impact for you. If you're trying to, have high revenue management on a property that's an average property, and I'm seeing you're taking definitely more average designed and well-designed properties and really taking them to a whole new level.
No, 100%. Glad you mentioned that. One of the foundational levels of how we begin to forecast and how we begin to strategize derives off the property's identity. And you mentioned it, whether it has views, whether it's beachfront, whether it's ski in, ski out, designer friendly, amenity driven. These are the components that are foundational to optimizing your revenue. While I have a biased opinion that revenue management is the brains of this business, we're only as good as the product. right? The marketing component is equally as important. The guest component, the 5-star reviews, the positioning of the property. It's truly, truly important to be able to present and deliver a product so we can stretch those ceilings, so we can test new and emerging revenue numbers, new and emerging annualized target goals. And the product is where it begins. So the design component, the photography, everything you hear out there of how you should be building your property is 100% fundamental for optimal success from a revenue angle.
Yep. And I wanted to mention that because, I actually spoke to someone who said, oh, I hired Emile for my property and it didn't really make a big impact. And I'm like, well, send me the property. Let me take a look at it. And I'm like, okay, well, you don't have any amenities. You have really plain Jane design. And, there's nothing that's making me draw to this property. Like what's the marketing aspect of it? And it's so important that in this industry and the way it's gone, especially over the last 3 or 4 years with saturation and more people getting into space is, you have to set yourself apart from the competition, and it has to be in not just one aspect. You got to do it all. You can no longer just be, I'll be average here and good here and I'll be okay. You might be, but if you really want to be in that top 10, top 1%, you got to hit on all cylinders, and revenue management is a big piece of that.
No, 100%. And really acknowledging and having the awareness of revenue management is really the starting point. It's a starting point for all of us. We all have to be aware of the pricing tools. And some folks out there are still manually pricing, and there's nothing against manually pricing. I did do manual pricing for multiple years when I first started in the industry, and still performed at a really high level until I truly realized, the value of time and the value of a team, and really identifying the gaps and the weaknesses when I was doing things myself. We've all heard the Dan Sullivan who, not how methodology, and this is applicable for all of us at scale. Anybody can come into the game and treat this as an extracurricular activity, manage 5 properties, 10 properties, do the marketing, do the revenue, do the guest communications. But to truly perform at the highest level, to truly scale and maximize the opportunity for time freedom, because that takes me back to why we even enter the industry to begin with. Are we here to slave day in and day night to speak to guests, to handle pricing tools, maintenance issues, plumbing problems? No, each of us have a why, and we have to always consider the why of why we've entered into this industry and keep that at the forefront of every thought, because that'll evolve and change your processes and systems to allow you to truly perform at the top.
Yep. And I'm going to bring up a second book from The Who Not How. The reason why I called you was after I read the book Buy Back Your Time by Dan Martell. It was like, all right, I am spending so much of my time on revenue management, and the real estate business is growing and the co-host business is growing and the podcast and all these different things that are on my plate. I'm like, I need to, and I was on vacation this summer with my family, and we took a 2.5-week trip. We took our camper to Colorado and Grand Canyon, the whole works. But every single morning I was getting up and working on revenue management for 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and that was just one aspect of it. Yes, there was guest communication. There was other things that we're working on eliminating as well. But I was at the end of the vacation. I'm like, I got to make a change. Like this is time for me to start to, buy back some of my time. And man, I don't even think about revenue management right now. And I will tell you, it is probably, out of everything that I've done in my co-host business, the one thing that has taken more stress and given me more time back than anything else that I've done.
100%. You nailed it. You nailed it on the head. I always like to incorporate the psychological perception of freedom, and redefining freedom on your own terms. And the time value is one of the most, if not the most important factors to think about. Owners don't necessarily want more bookings, but they want freedom from second guessing and the time allotment and the confidence in the strategy. And what truly unlocks the peace of mind. That's what we sell at Pricing by Mira. And it's super, super important for each of us individuals into the industry to think about where our time is being allocated and be truthful. I'm not sure, if you've heard of 5 voices. There's an exam out there. It's a free test online, and it tells you 5 different personalities, kind of tells you your strengths, your weaknesses. And when I first started in the industry, when I was doing everything, all of the sectors, marketing, revenue, guest communication, there was still a heavy weight on my shoulders. And I took this test, and quickly I realized where my strengths were and quickly realized where I needed to enhance. Well, rather than spending most of my time enhancing the areas that I was weak in, I hired it out, and I brought on a COO. I brought on operational and HR management to do the things that just weighed me down and really took my time. That opened up the doors to a whole new world of really exposing yourself in one niche or 2 niches or 2 specialties and really taking it to the highest level possible. And that is what really starts to begin the quantum leap, for each of us individually. It's really expanding and really reaching capacity and not being watered down versions, right? If you have a team of 3 or a property count of 50 and you're looking to grow and it's just you and one other individual and you're really juggling all of the components in the business, you are watered down. You're not spending enough time on the 2 or 3 most important things that's going to allow you to truly move the needle for longevity.
No, I agree. And I've seen, in the industry, I've seen partnerships formed. I've seen people that came together, people, obviously you and I are both in Bill's mastermind. So we, get to collaborate with some really high level people in that space. And, in doing so, you truly learn where your genius zone is as well. And you're able to have those other people to rely on. And I talk about this all the time on the show is, you have to be in the right room with the right people to level up. And you got to put yourself in a position to be with those people so you understand, where you can have your strengths and where you can improve.
No, 100%. And I'm glad you mentioned Bill Faith's Mastermind. It's truly an environment and an opportunity to surround yourself with the highest level of operators with various levels of experience, supported by an experienced individual. It really makes a difference. And folks, that's how I started. I started in Bill Faith's Mastermind, learning the nitty gritty behind marketing, behind revenue, behind how to set up templates and OwnerRez and software systems. It's really one of, if not the most important factors to my individual success. I call it the multiplier. Being in the right room and surround yourself with the right person or the right coach or the right mastermind, it's going to allow you the chance to mitigate errors and mistakes and allow you to sustain and fulfill those quantum leaps. One thing that I always talk about are the 3 steps to success that I learned from Tony Robbins. And number 1 is modeling. If you are open and willing to allocating your time to revenue management, by all means, do it yourself. I encourage you to. But if you acknowledge and recognize that you want more time and you want to focus on a different sector in the industry, then you want to go find that expert. You want to go find that individual that's performing at the highest level and operating with the evolution of the market and the economy. It's one thing to say that you're a revenue manager, you have 100 or 200 properties, and you're doing a good job. It's another to say you're adapting to the trends, you're adapting to the evolution of the market and economical conditions. You're understanding how AI comes into the mix. And I'm super, super excited to present what's coming in 2026 here soon on just AI exposure. And it's important for us to acknowledge AI will only help from a quantitative angle. It will not replace our qualitative thinking of how to hedge our competition, how to optimize, when to pull, how to pull, when to change. So be super cautious also out there. If you're hearing things like AI will just do it for me. Yes, absolutely. AI can do anything for you, but at what level, at what percentage revenue are you trying to generate for yourself and in your market? Is it top 1% or is it 50%? Things to think about, holistically as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. Yeah, one of the things that I like to talk about. Actually, I talked with Kenny Bedwell about it on his podcast a while back. Was revenue management is not a what's my revenue going to be for the year. You really have to break it down. And if you're out there going to do this yourself, and you're like, okay, my goal for 2026 is to hit $150,000. That's great, but what's your goal for January? What's your goal for February? And then when you get into peak seasons, you almost have to break it down into micro seasons, which is really what you guys do. Is you break down the revenue management into mini micro seasons, because there's so many different changes that fluctuate in that. So for those that are out there doing it themselves, like, you really need to break down at minimum by the month, if not by the micro season, to really understand what your goals are if you really want to have a chance to hit those top tier numbers.
100%. And I pride and praise setting revenue targets. You have to have an aim. And when you have that annualized target in mind, and then we break that down by month, and then start to strategize on minimum stays, on gaps, on booking windows, that changes the entire course of how you operate as a revenue manager. And it's really, really hard as us investors to think this way if we've been practicing just off of data. If you're logged into Price Labs, for example, and you see a property next door that's priced in the 99th percentile, that doesn't necessarily mean that's where you need to be priced. Right. So you have to really think about the full picture, and what's really worked and what's happening with your properties, Joe, is we do have it broken down into month by month seasons. And because of those well-defined targets, and we're constantly trying to increase the ceiling, when we set rates and we set strategy, we don't truly know maximum potential. None of us do. If we booked for 1,000 last year and we've booked for 1,300 this year, who's to say we can't book for 1,500 or 1,800 or 2,000? But it's important how you approach this methodology and plan accordingly with the pacing, with the booking trends, with the seasonal factors in mind, with repeating seasons, non-repeating seasons, and then getting into advanced customizations by month. That's when you really start to separate yourself from all of your competition, as when you're looking things that granular.
Yep. And I think it's important. It's funny. We have a property that we launched back in September, and it was a well-designed bachelorette theme. And I have now had, I think, 6 or 7 email, maybe more conversations with my manager on your team that is like, hey, we're getting bookings. Like, we're already at like 50 something K on the year. We've increased prices like 6 times or 7 times because we keep getting booked, and we're booking far out, right? So we're, that typically doesn't happen in my properties. We're not usually booking out that much, but because of the traction that this particular property is, like, we have a property that's 2.5 blocks from the beach, and we're getting over $1,500 a night right now because of the design, and we just keep moving that revenue management forward. A lot of people would sit back and say, oh, great, I'm getting booked. I'm going to have a great summer. And I'm sitting back saying, man, why are we booking so quickly? And we're having conversations with the revenue manager, and we keep making adjustments, and now we're pushing that envelope even more.
100%. It's going back to the thought that you don't hit annual targets by winning every month. You hit them by not losing the wrong ones. And shoulder season is where strategy actually matters.
Yes.
If you start to interpret objective data and what's happening in shoulder and off season and markets that have 15%, 18%, 20% occupancy, and then you take a big picture umbrella standpoint and you look at where the market is priced, it's absurd where the objective data is supporting these prices. And most of the time, and I've owned and managed in several markets, for several years now, to see trends and to know that when I see obscure revenue numbers, if it's truly obscure or not. And you have to take a step aside and you have to say, okay, here's objective data, here's historical data, here's where the market's performing. How can I hedge? How can I separate myself from what's happening around me in a better light? And when you start to think about this and you start to psychologically build a different strategy and perspective, you start to see better results. particularly in shoulder and off season, when you start getting bookings with 5-star reviews, when 80% of the market is unbooked, this is going to sustain the momentum with your positioning and your visibility in the algorithm to now be truly set during Christmas or during New Year's for that spring break booking or that maximum ADR peak season summer booking. So definitely a full circle of things to consider, from seasonality all the way to strategy and shoulder to peak season and everything in between.
So let's bring it down a little bit of a notch for the newer investor that's getting started. Maybe they have one property, maybe they have 2 or 3 co-host properties. They're doing revenue management themselves, and they're still trying to figure out what are like 2 or 3 like key points that they could focus on now to learn over the next 30 to 45 days before going into peak season that they could implement in their business, the ones that are trying to do it themselves.
Yeah, that's a good question. If you're a new investor and you're just beginning, it's important for you to think or know how to access resources. If joining a mastermind or joining a network of entrepreneurs or having accountability groups is not at your disposal, or if it is, you absolutely want to take advantage of something like that to really build the experience in a faster time frame, like joining, Bill Faye's Inner Circle that's really well equipped from 1 property to 5 properties. But more importantly, if you don't have access to those types of resources or programs, you want to at least consider a third-party platform that can provide you with projections, such as AirDNA or STR Insights, or even PriceLab's Revenue Estimator. If you're new and you're starting in a market and you have no earthly idea of any of the data or what you can make, it's important to have a starting point. So the Revenue Estimator and PriceLabs exposes you to potential in the market based on filters of amenities for specific properties. If you can play with these metrics on day 1, day 2, day 5, month 1, then you're going to start to develop a plan. And hopefully you have some sort of pro forma or analysis, pre-acquisition before you buy. So you don't end up, shooting from the hip and drastically getting hurt financially, because real estate, it very much is a risk, just as much benefit as it comes. It's a big risk. So you have to be able to identify and interpret true analysis. Even if there's a 10 to 15% discrepancy, you want to have a range of where you think you can land.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny you said shooting from the hip, because I was going to bring that up. I was going to say, there's a lot of us out there, and we've all been guilty of it. You have too, that at some point you were just shooting from the hip when you're doing your revenue management. And for you, it may have been 3 or 4 years ago. For me, it was just probably a year ago. And it was like, okay, because I didn't have every single data point. And I didn't have time to get through every single data point. So I was like, well, I feel like we're going to be here. And, sometimes you're going to hit some home runs and sometimes you're not. And that's the problem with when you're shooting from the hip, is that one bad booking, And this is what I told a client earlier this month. He was closing on his first short-term rental and he was debating on hiring a revenue manager or not. I'm like, let's just say you get one 7-night booking in June at $500 a night that you could have gotten $800 a night. Now you're talking $1,500 for your 7 nights, or $2,100 for your 7 nights. Guess what? You just paid for your revenue manager probably for the whole year, right? Literally 1 week that you missed by $300 a night, and you pretty much paid for that whole service that you wouldn't have to mess up on.
100%. It continues to amaze me, Joe, that tenured investors or entrepreneurs, when they're considering a revenue manager, we have a setup fee. And the setup fee ranges, right around $1,300. That single fee alone has been a deterrent for, I want to say, at least 20% of the folks that we encounter. That fee seems so large on the front end. And in reality, Joe, I think it's just a wall. It's fear.
Yep.
It's limited belief to think that they're going to be spiraling down financially because of the cost. One thing that I have acknowledged and recognized is how much investments that I've personally purchased in myself in 3, 4 different masterminds, personal development over the years, and how it's continued to allow me to leap in ways that I've never done before. There's a cost to doing great business, Joe. All of us need a coach. All of us need a mentor. So
Yep.
I encourage you guys, don't let a fee, it doesn't have to be with me or my service. It could be with anybody. Don't let a fee be the end all of your decision,
Yep.
which in that decision could drastically change the outcome positively for your life.
Yeah, I agree. And we've talked about this before. I tell everyone that you really should join something, right? But whatever you do, you have to do it with purpose and with intention. And Bill has been calling me for 2 years to join his mastermind. I've talked to him multiple times about it, but we were not in a financial position to invest in more properties yet. We were building. We were growing our co-hosting business. And for me, I had my co-host mastermind and we were building a business together and it was great. But we hit a portion this year that my wife and I are like, okay, now it's time. Now I'm like, okay, I'm going to join this because I know the people in this room are going to help me buy more properties, open more doors, because we're in a position for that now. So we did it with intention. Looking forward to our first event. Actually, when this airs, Emile and I should be up on the slopes in Whitefish, Montana, when this airs next week. So yeah, I'm super excited to be a part of that. I've been in other masterminds. I was in a Builders of Authority mastermind. I joined the Short-Term Secrets for a short period of time. I've had my own mastermind, and it actually goes all the way back to when I joined Bill's accelerator program. All the way back in 2022 is when I made my first investment in myself.
Yeah, no, Joe, super excited. You're in the mastermind. Every time I think about a move or a choice or a decision, I think about freedom. And I think about freedom and how I define it for myself. And I think about the why behind everything. And freedom starts with desire. But desire without direction is just noise.
Yep.
And that's why direction from a coach or a mentor or a group or a modeling expert is essential for capitalizing, in each of our journeys as an entrepreneur. Most people want freedom, but they don't want the responsibility that comes with it. Desire is easy, but deciding what you're willing to give up for it is hard. We don't lack the motivation, but we lack the clarity. And if the desire isn't strong, the discipline won't last. So super, super important. Commitment is choosing before you feel ready. Yep. We will always have something within us that slows us down, something within us that makes us feel less confident.
Yeah.
You don't drift into freedom, you commit to it. So have that desire, be committed to yourself. Be confident, have the faith that you can and you will succeed in whatever you personally feel like you're accomplished to do. Faith isn't blind optimism. It's staying disciplined when the data hasn't caught up yet. So, I encourage, desire is what will get you started. Commitment will keep you going. Faith gets you through the quiet, and the result is freedom. And each of us need to be able to define it on our own terms.
No, I think that's huge, which kind of leads me into, one of the things that we're going to talk about on this show going forward with everyone, and you get to be the first one. So, and it's going to be about goals, because I'm a big believer in writing down your goals and working towards them and understanding them. And we're not talking just like 1 month goals or 1 year goals. We're talking like really writing out your life plan, which is one of the things I learned in Bill's accelerator from the get-go. But if you had to grade yourself for 2025, because we're at the end of it, did you hit your goals that you set out for yourself for 2025?
Great question. Short answer is 100%. I sure did. And, anesthesia, Joe, has been my identity. Background in anesthesia, went to school my whole life, have a passion for healthcare, have a passion for my patients. Have truly had a humbling career. Being able to finally put in my notice in anesthesia to really give myself all in intent for my businesses and for my time and for my individualized defined freedom has been the greatest gift in 2025. And it's important going into 2026 that we all not just set goals, but think bigger than we're accustomed to thinking. You know, a lot of us that come into entrepreneurship, we're type A personality. We want the control. We want to know it all. We want to do it all, which is great, but we have to have a focused approach. And it's important to think beyond logic. I heard from a close friend now and global speaker, it's about capacity. It's not reaching your true potential. It's about finding your capacity. So think bigger than what you're normally accustomed to. I encourage you guys to read 10x is easier than 2x. Each of us can double our hours to make twice the amount of money. But to make 10 times the amount of money, to have 10 times the growth or that quantum leap that we don't necessarily know what it looks like at the end of the day, that requires a different mindset. So I encourage everybody to start with a different mindset, think bigger, think about a goal that scares you and something that really drives you to be uncomfortable. If you're comfortable, you haven't stretched your imagination. It's getting uncomfortable is when you really start to grow. And that's what's going to start to really build, your internal drive over time as you continue down your entrepreneurial journey.
I mean, that really kind of ties into the book that I just finished, which is Science of Scaling. I just finished that book last week, which is basically very similar to 10x is greater than 2x. And so now we're talking about what are your impossible goals? Like, it's one thing to set out your goals, but one of the things they talk about in that book is what is your impossible goal? And we did this as a Savvy team, and Tyler said our impossible goal that we don't think is really impossible is $1 trillion in short-term rental sales in 2026. So that's our impossible goal. We want to hit $1 trillion. So have you thought about what your impossible goal is for 2026 that you want to go after?
Yeah, there's a couple. My small impossible, I wouldn't call it impossible, it's very possible, is definitely writing and publishing my first book in 2026. But my large, big, bold, hairy goal is Pricing by Mira truly becomes acknowledged and recognized as the global #1 revenue management company where it's a must. It's a must have in this business for short-term rentals. Joe, I've got great things on the horizon, partnering with global AI experts, with global skills with data analytics. And my goal is to really cultivate an experience to impact every single individual that partners with us. And because the result of your properties, the result of your portfolio impacts your personal life, impacts your professional goals. We're your financial advisors. So it's important for me to think beyond that and really cultivate the best possible experience for all of my clients for Pricing by Mira, and to take it globally. That's the big goal. And if it's gone global, then we're talking $1 billion company.
No, that's really awesome. And your staff has grown substantially over the last year or so. How many total revenue managers and then support staff are you with right now?
Yeah, yep. Good question. So we have a total of 10. We have 3 senior revenue managers, certified revenue management executives. We have 6 certified revenue analysts, HR representative, and comp set specialist. So it's a great team. It started as a thought and a goal and a vision. We've really grown since day one, and it's just like anything, guys. If you're thinking of doing something or you're thinking about opening a business, just start. Just start. We don't need to know all the angles. I don't have all of the softwares figured out or how to build the perfect software. I have ideas, but to build the most robust softwares, it doesn't come overnight, but starting and taking that 1% motto day in and day out, doing what the other 99% aren't willing to do, is how you're going to continue to evolve.
Nope. That's awesome. That's awesome, man. But tons of great nuggets on this show. I mean, every time that we've had a conversation, which honestly has been very limited. We actually didn't meet in person until the STR Wealth Conference this year in Nashville, even though we've had probably dozens of conversations across social media and stuff like that. But man, when you post, when you talk, when you're on podcasts, I definitely learn something every single time, and I appreciate all that because man, it has changed my life. Yeah, I tell people hiring a revenue manager. We're implementing Host Buddy AI finally. We're starting to buy back more of our time in our business, and that first big step for me was having you guys jump on board, and I'm really forever grateful and looking forward to a great 2026 to see where we can push the limits.
Super excited to see what's coming your way, Joe. Super excited to be a part of your journey. You're creaming it, particularly in the Panama City Beach area. So glad you're building robust, client relationships with Savvy. Super excited to see you in person in Montana. I think it's going to be a blast. We'll be able to sip on an old fashioned and chit chat on 2026 goals. For anybody out there that is just struggling to make a decision, struggling to take a leap. Please feel free. I'm an open book. Yes, we're on a podcast, but please reach out to me. I'd love to help. I'd love to impact. I just really want you guys to open your minds to the possibilities of what can be. And one way of reaching me, Joe, is through pricingbymira.com. You can check out the website, and of course, anybody can Facebook me and message me. I'm very, very laid back. And easygoing when it comes to helping others.
Yep, and you can hopefully spend a little time with my daughter, who is starting nursing school next week. She's been in college for 2 years, but her official nursing program starts next Wednesday, and you can give her some tips and pointers when you get to meet her. So.
Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, looking forward to it. Tell her to come prepared with questions, and I'll be prepared to blow her mind with possibilities.
Awesome. So you guys heard it. We're going to put those links in the show notes. So make sure that you reach out to Emile and the Pricing by Mira team. Seriously has changed my life and given me back a lot more of my time. And I can't wait till the end of 2026 when I can tell you guys how much more money we made year over year. I have a lofty goal of 40% increase in my properties, which is going to really take things to the next level. But you just got to keep pushing the limits. So, Emile, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you guys for listening. This is the first ever podcast of the Short-Term Rental Playmaker, where we are going to have playmakers on week in and week out because that's what you got to do in this place. All right. You guys have a good week.